In the glittering ballrooms of 1818 London, a woman's worth was measured in titles and dowries, not in wit or intellect. Miss Alara Vance had neither. The daughter of a man whose name was a whisper of scandal, she was a ghost in the marriage market, deemed utterly unfit for nobility. They mocked her quiet observations and dismissed her sharp mind as an unfortunate trait in a woman. But they never imagined that the most powerful man in the room, the enigmatic Duke Alistair Beaumont of Blackwood, was searching not for a decorative wife, but for a partner. He would hear her thoughts when no one else would listen, and in a moment that would shatter society, he would call her his only equal. The air in the Harrington ballroom was thick with perfume, wax, and the stifling weight of expectation. For Miss Alara Vance, it was a familiar poison. She stood near a potted palm, the fronds offering a meagre shield from the prying eyes of the tongue. At 21, she was on the verge of being declared a spinster, a fate her mother, Mrs. Vance, lamented with the theatrical despair of a stage actress. "You must try, Alara," her mother had whispered ferociously in the carriage, her fingers pinching Alara's arm. "Smile. Appear demure. For heaven's sake, do not look as though you are dissecting the floral arrangements for botanical study." But that was precisely what Alara was doing. The orchids were a fascinating hybrid she'd only read about in a treatise by Sir Joseph Banks. It was far more interesting than the vapid chatter circulating around her. Her family's position was precarious. Her late father, a brilliant but reckless investor, had been a contemporary of the great banker Henry Hope, but had none of his caution. He had lost their fortune in a disastrous venture involving Dutch tulips decades after the mania had passed, a folly that left them with a respectable name, but hollow coffers. They were the Vances of Surrey, a name that still opened doors, but only just. Inside, they were met with the cold condescension reserved for the genteelly poor. "Look, it's the little Vance mouse," a voice dripped with saccharine cruelty. Lady Beatrice Cresswell, a diamond of the first water with a fortune as vast as her arrogance, glided past with her coterie of admirers. I wonder her mother still insists on parading her about. The thread on that gown is positively desperate. Alara's cheeks burned, but she kept her gaze fixed on the orchestra, her posture ramrod straight. The gown, a simple blue silk, was her best, painstakingly refashioned by her own hands from one of her mother's. To show she was wounded was to give them victory. Her only friend in this gilded cage was Mr. Thomas Albright, the son of a country baronet, a kind man with gentle eyes and an equally gentle ambition. He approached her now, offering a small, conspiratorial smile. "Ignoring the vultures, I see," he said, his voice a low comfort. "It is my most practiced skill," Alara replied, a hint of a genuine smile touching her lips. "How are you enjoying the season, Thomas?" "As much as a fox enjoys a hunt when he is the quarry. My father is determined to see me wed to an heiress. I believe he has a list." He sighed, looking out at the swirling dancers. "And you? Has your mother's campaign met with any success?" Ilara's smile faded. "She has her sights set on Viscount Crowley for me. He's 60, twice widowed, and has a fondness for port that stains his teeth. But he possesses an estate in Kent. In her eyes, that makes him a prize." Before Thomas could reply, a sudden hush fell over the room. The music seemed to soften. The chatter died to a murmur. All heads turned towards the grand entrance. Framed by the marble archway stood a man who commanded attention without demanding it. Duke Alistair Beaumont of Blackwood. He was impossibly tall, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the colour of a stormy sea. His reputation preceded him. He was one of the wealthiest men in England, a peer of the realm who spoke in Parliament with a frighteningly sharp intellect. He was also a recluse, rarely seen at such frivolous events. Rumour had it he was a scientist, an inventor, a man who preferred the company of books and strange contraptions to people. At 32, he was unmarried, making him the single most sought-after man in the kingdom. Beatrice Cresswell immediately straightened, her painted smile becoming a weapon. She and every other eligible lady in the room seemed to hold their breath as the Duke began to move through the crowd, his host, Lord Harrington, sputtering at his side. Alistair's gaze swept the room with a bored, analytical detachment. It was an expression Ilara understood perfectly, the look of someone observing a foreign species. His eyes passed over the fawning ladies, the hopeful mothers, the calculating fathers. Then, for a fleeting, impossible moment, his gaze met Ilara's. It was only for a second, but it felt longer. In that brief contact, she saw not the arrogance of a duke, but a flicker of something else, a shared weariness, a mutual recognition of the absurdity of it all. Then he looked away, and the moment was gone. He was swallowed by the crowd, with Lady Beatrice positioning herself directly in his path. "He would never look at someone like you," her mother hissed, appearing at her elbow as if by magic. "Stop staring, it's unseemly. Now, Viscount Crowley is by the refreshments. Go and compliment his waistcoat." Ilara felt a familiar wave of resignation. This was her life, a constant performance in a play she despised, for a prize she did not want. As she turned to obey her mother, she took one last look at the Duke, now trapped in a conversation with Beatrice. He looked like a caged lion, powerful and utterly out of place. For the first time that evening, she felt she was not entirely alone in her gilded prison. A week later, seeking refuge from another impending ball, Ilara slipped away to a place she felt truly at home. Hatchard's bookshop on Piccadilly. The scent of old paper and leather binding was a balm to her soul. Here, a person's worth was determined by the quality of their thoughts, not their title. She ran her fingers over the spine of a new translation of Ovid, her mind a world away from matchmaking and social maneuvering. She was in a quiet corner, engrossed in a text on celestial mechanics by Caroline Herschel, when a deep voice startled her. A bold choice for a lady. Most prefer sentimental novels. Ilara looked up, her heart lurching into her throat. It was the Duke of Blackwood. He was dressed not in the finery of a duke at court, but in a simple, well-tailored dark coat, looking more like a university scholar than a peer of the realm. He was alone. She felt a blush creep up her neck, but refused to be intimidated. Perhaps some ladies find the predictable orbits of planets more romantic than the predictable plots of novels, Your Grace. A flicker of genuine surprise crossed his features, followed by the barest hint of a smile. It transformed his severe face, making him look younger, more approachable. An astute observation, Miss Vance, Ilara Vance. Miss Vance. He said her name slowly, as if testing its weight. "You are familiar with Herschel's work?" "I am. I find her discovery of new nebulae to be revolutionary. It suggests the universe is infinitely more complex than we imagine." The Duke's stormy eyes lit with a sudden, intense interest. It was a look no one had ever given her before, one of pure, intellectual curiosity. "Most people see the stars and think of mythology. You see mathematics." "Mythology is the story we tell ourselves about the stars," Ilara countered, feeling a strange boldness. "Mathematics is the story the stars tell us about themselves." For a moment he was silent, simply studying her. The air in the small alcove crackled with an energy that had nothing to do with social standing. It was the friction of two minds striking against each other. "You were at the Harrington ball," he stated, not as a question. "I was," she confirmed, her tone dry. A mandatory exercise in futility. This time he did smile. "My own thoughts, precisely. I attend one such event a season, a penance I pay for the privilege of my title. It allows my mother, the Dowager Duchess, to believe I am making an effort." "And are you, Your Grace?" "Making an effort?" The question was impertinent, and she regretted it the moment it left her lips. But the Duke did not seem offended. He leaned against the bookshelf, his height making the space feel intimate. "I am making an effort to find something real, a conversation that is not an artifice. It is a rarer commodity in this city than gold." He gestured to the book in her hands. "Tell me, Miss Vance, what do you truly think of Herschel's assertion that the Milky Way is but one of many such islands in the cosmos?" And so began the most extraordinary conversation of Ilara's life. They spoke for nearly an hour, hidden among the bookshelves, their voices low but their minds racing. They debated Kepler's laws, the nature of light, and the philosophical implications of an infinite universe. Ilara forgot he was a duke, and she a social pariah. He was simply a brilliant mind, and for the first time, she felt her own mind was being seen, appreciated, and even challenged. He didn't patronize her or simplify his language. He spoke to her as an equal. The spell was broken when the bookseller, Mr. Hatchard himself, bustled past, his eyes widening in shock at seeing the great Duke of Blackwood in conversation with the penniless Miss Vance. The intrusion brought the real world crashing back in. "I have kept you too long," the Duke said, his formal mask slipping back into place, though the warmth in his eyes remained. "Forgive my intrusion." "It was no intrusion, Your Grace," Ilara said softly, her heart sinking at the thought of it ending. He gave a slight, formal bow. "I hope we might continue this discussion at a later date, Miss Vance." He then turned and left the shop, leaving Ilara breathless, the book on celestial mechanics still clutched in her hands. She watched him go, a maelstrom of emotions swirling within her. She had just had a conversation with the most powerful man in London, and it had been as easy and natural as breathing. But she was Ilara Vance, the girl with the scandalous father and no dowry. He was the Duke of Blackwood. Their worlds were orbits, as predictable and as separate as those of Earth and Mars. To believe anything could come of it was as foolish as believing one could reach out and touch the stars. The Duke's promise to continue their conversation felt like a dream Ilara was afraid to wake from. Days turned into a week, and she heard nothing. The brief, brilliant connection in the bookshop began to feel like a figment of her imagination. She was forced back into the dreary reality of her life, fending off Viscount Crowley's lecherous glances and enduring her mother's constant lectures. Then the invitation arrived. It was not a simple card, but a thick, cream-colored parchment bearing the ducal crest of Blackwood, a raven clutching a key. It was an invitation not to a ball, but to a private viewing at the Duke's London residence, Beaumont House. He was unveiling a new acquisition, a grand orrery, a mechanical model of the solar system, crafted by the finest artisans in Geneva. The guest list, her mother noted with breathless reverence, was limited to 30 of the most influential members of society, including fellows from the Royal Society and key political figures, and, inexplicably, Miss Ilara Vance. "It must be a mistake," Ilara said, staring at her name written in elegant cursive. "Nonsense," her mother trilled, her eyes gleaming with triumph. "He saw you. He was captivated. This is it, Ilara. This is our chance. You will wear the new pearls. We will purchase them on credit, and you will not speak of nebulae or anything else of the sort. You will be charming and agreeable." Ilara knew her mother was wrong. The Duke had not been captivated by her charm. He had been intrigued by her mind. This invitation was not a romantic overture, but a continuation of their discussion. It was a test. Beaumont House was a palace on Park Lane, a fortress of wealth and power. As Ilara and her mother were announced, a hush fell over the assembled guests in the grand salon. She could feel their eyes on her, could hear the unspoken questions. Who is she? What is a Vance doing here? Lady Beatrice Cresswell stood near the fireplace, resplendent in emerald green, her expression a mask of pure venom. She exchanged a look with the formidable Dowager Duchess, a woman with a stare as cold and hard as the diamonds at her throat. Ilara felt a chill of premonition. These were not just social rivals, they were sharks circling the water, and they had just scented blood. The Duke appeared, and the room's focus shifted to him. He was a commanding presence, greeting his guests with polite formality. When his eyes found Ilara, he gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod. It was a small acknowledgement, but it was enough to steady her nerves. He led them into a room that looked more like a laboratory than a parlor. In the center, gleaming under a chandelier, was the orrery. It was a masterpiece of brass and silver, a clockwork universe of gears and spheres. As the Duke began to explain its intricate workings, Ilara found herself completely absorbed. The gearing ratios are based on the calculations of Christian Huygens, but have been refined to an accuracy of 1 minute per century for the outer planets, he explained. A portly earl scoffed. A pretty toy, Beaumont, but what is the use of it? Before the Duke could answer, Ilara spoke, her voice clear and steady. Its use, my lord, is to remind us of our place, that we live on a sphere of rock in a vast, ordered system, governed by laws we are only beginning to comprehend. It is the opposite of a toy. It is a monument to humility. Silence. The Earl blinked, stunned into speechlessness. From across the room, Ilara saw Lady Beatrice's eyes narrow with fury. But the Duke turned to Ilara, and a slow, genuine smile spread across his face. It was a smile of pure approbation, a public acknowledgement of her intellect. "Precisely, Miss Vance," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet room. "A monument to humility." He then addressed his next words directly to her, excluding everyone else. "I have been struggling with the escapement mechanism for the moon's orbital inclination. It requires a compound gear train that I have yet to design successfully. Perhaps you might have a thought on the matter." It was an unprecedented act. In a room full of London's most powerful people, the Duke of Blackwood had singled out the penniless Miss Vance and asked for her intellectual counsel. It was a declaration. He was not courting her in the traditional sense. He was engaging her, elevating her in a way that was far more intimate and far more scandalous. He led her to the orrery, and they bent their heads together over the complex machinery, their conversation a low murmur of technical terms and shared ideas. The rest of the room faded away. For Ilara, there was only the clockwork universe, and the man who saw her as no one else did. But she was not oblivious to the daggers being stared into her back. The Dowager Duchess watched them, her expression unreadable but deeply unsettling. And Lady Beatrice's jealousy was no longer a quiet contempt. It was a simmering, palpable rage. Ilara had not just been invited into the Duke's home. She had been invited into his world, a world Beatrice believed was hers by right. And Beatrice Cresswell was not a woman who surrendered what she believed to be hers. The Duke's public display of favour at the orrery unveiling lit a firestorm in the drawing rooms of Mayfair. Ilara Vance was no longer an invisible wallflower. She was an enigma, a subject of intense and often malicious speculation. The Tun, unable to comprehend an attraction based on intellect, searched for a more scandalous explanation. The campaign against her was orchestrated with surgical precision by Lady Beatrice Cresswell, aided by the silent, powerful approval of the Dowager Duchess. The whispers began subtly. I heard her father was not just a poor investor, but a cheat. Fled the country to escape debtor's prison, you know. They say her mother was an actress before she trapped Mr. Vance. That sort of blood never washes out. The rumors were insidious, twisting the truth of her family's misfortune into a narrative of moral failing and social climbing. Ilara felt the shift immediately. Ladies who had once offered a cool nod now turned their backs on her completely. Invitations, which had been scarce before, now ceased entirely. She and her mother were effectively ostracized. Her mother was frantic. "This is a disaster," she cried, pacing their small rented house. "That Duke has ruined us. By showing you such unnatural attention, he has made you a target. You should have swooned over his machine, not debated its mechanics." Ilara felt a cold dread seep into her heart. She had not heard from the Duke since that night. Had he tired of his novelty? Was he, like everyone else, swayed by the vicious gossip? The cruelest blow came at a musical hosted by the Countess of Stanhope. Ilara and her mother attended out of sheer desperation, hoping to show a brave face. As Ilara stood alone, Beatrice approached, her smile a predatory slash of red. "Miss Vance," she began, her voice loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I must congratulate you. It is a rare talent to capture the Duke's attention. He has such a fascination with oddities, scientific curiosities. I suppose after his clockwork universe, he desired a clockwork woman to match." The insult was sharp and public. The women around them tittered behind their fans. Ilara felt the blood drain from her face. She wanted to flee, to hide, but she met Beatrice's cruel gaze and held it. "And I suppose, Lady Beatrice," Ilara replied, her voice trembling but clear, "that after a lifetime of interacting with decorative dolls, the Duke finds a woman who can think for herself to be a refreshing change." Beatrice's smile faltered, a flash of fury in her eyes. But before she could retort, a formidable figure intervened. The Dowager Duchess of Blackwood, Alistair's mother, had been observing them. "Lady Beatrice," the Duchess said, her voice like chips of ice. "There is no need to engage with those who so clearly do not understand their place." She gave Ilara a look of utter disdain, a dismissal more profound than any insult. Some people are simply not fit for the world they find themselves in. The Duchess then turned and led Beatrice away, leaving Ilara standing alone, utterly humiliated. It was a public branding. She had been officially marked as unworthy by the two most important women in the Duke's life. She fled the music hall, her mother's recriminations echoing in her ears. She walked for miles through the London streets, heedless of the dark and the grime, her heart a leaden weight in her chest. The Duke had opened a door to a world of intellectual vibrancy she had only dreamed of, only to have it slammed shut in her face. He had shown her what it was to be seen as an equal, making her current reality, where she was seen as less than nothing, unbearable. She returned home, soaked from a sudden downpour, to find a letter waiting for her. The Blackwood crest was on the seal. Her hands shook as she opened it. It was not from the Duke, but from his mother. The note was brief and brutal. It requested Ilara's presence at Beaumont House the following afternoon. It was not an invitation. It was a summons. Ilara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that she was walking into an execution. The Dowager Duchess's private salon was a study in intimidating opulence. Gilt furniture, severe-looking portraits of Beaumont ancestors, and a suffocating silence greeted Ilara. The Duchess sat enthroned in a high-backed chair, a porcelain cup of tea held in a hand laden with rings. She did not offer Ilara a seat. "Miss Vance," she began, her voice devoid of any warmth. "I will be direct, as I do not believe in wasting time on social pleasantries you are unaccustomed to. Your association with my son will end." Ilara stood her ground, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. "Your Grace, I am not certain what association you refer to." The Duchess gave a dry, humourless laugh. "Do not play the ingenue. It does not suit you. My son is a man of peculiar interests. He is a genius, and like all geniuses, he can be naive about the workings of the world. He sees you as a novel puzzle, a stimulating academic exercise. But society sees you for what you are. An ambitious young woman from a disgraced family with no dowry, attempting to entrap the most eligible bachelor in England." Every word was a carefully aimed dart, but Ilara refused to flinch. "That is not my intention." "Your intentions are irrelevant," the Duchess snapped. "The consequences are all that matter. The Beaumont name will not be sullied by such a connection. My son will marry a woman of his station. He will marry Lady Beatrice Cresswell, an arrangement that has been understood for years. You will cease all contact with him. If you do not, I will personally ensure that what you have experienced of society's scorn thus far will feel like a fond memory. Your family will be so thoroughly ruined that you will not receive an invitation to a country dog show. Am I clear?" The threat was absolute. The Duchess had the power to make good on it. Ilara's mind raced. To defy this woman was to condemn her family. But to acquiesce was to betray the one person who had ever valued her for who she truly was. "Your Grace," Ilara said, her voice quiet but firm, "your son is a grown man. Your quarrel is with him, not with me." Before the Duchess could erupt in fury, the salon doors opened. Duke Alistair Beaumont stood there, his face a thunderous mask. He had clearly heard everything. "Mother," he said, his voice dangerously low, "you will unhand my guest." The Duchess rose to her feet, her composure finally cracking. "Alistair, this is for your own good. This girl is manipulating you." "The only person attempting manipulation in this room is you," he countered, stepping to stand beside Ilara. His presence was a solid, reassuring wall. He looked at Ilara, his stormy eyes searching hers, a silent question passing between them. Did she believe them? Did she doubt him? She met his gaze, and in that moment, she let all of her pain, her humiliation, and her unwavering belief in him show. He seemed to understand completely. He turned back to his mother. "Miss Vance is the most honest and intellectually brilliant woman I have ever had the privilege of knowing. The whispers and lies circulating about her are the product of petty, jealous minds. Minds like Lady Beatrice's, whom I would not marry if she were the last woman on earth." He then did something that defied every rule of their society. He reached out and took Ilara's hand, lacing his fingers through hers in front of his aghast mother. "I will not be told with whom I can associate," he declared. "And my choice is to associate with Miss Vance. In fact, I am escorting her to the Vauxhall Masquerade tonight, publicly." The Vauxhall Masquerade was the premier social event of the season. To arrive with a lady on one's arm was a significant statement. To do so with a woman at the center of a raging scandal was an act of open rebellion. "Alistair, you will not," his mother gasped. "I will." He looked down at Ilara, his grip on her hand tightening. "If you will do me the honor, Miss Vance." Her heart was hammering against her ribs. This was it. The moment to retreat into the shadows or step into the fire at his side. The fear was immense, but the thought of his belief in her was a greater force. "I would be honored, Your Grace," she whispered. He gave her a small, breathtaking smile, and then led her from the room, leaving the Dowager Duchess standing amidst her gilded furniture, utterly defeated and incandescent with rage. As they walked down the grand corridor of Beaumont House, hand in hand, Ilara knew that the Duke had just declared war on his world, all for her. The battle was far from over, but for the first time, she was no longer fighting it alone. The news that the Duke of Blackwood was to escort Miss Ilara Vance to the Vauxhall masquerade spread through London like wildfire. It was a calculated, defiant move, and everyone knew it. For Ilara, the hours leading up to the event were a blur of terror and exhilaration. The Duke had sent a seamstress to her home with bolts of the finest silk and velvet, and a simple but exquisitely elegant silver mask. When his carriage arrived, a magnificent black coach bearing his crest, the entire street was filled with curious onlookers. Alistair himself stepped out, looking impossibly handsome in formal black attire, a raven-shaped mask in his hand. He took her hand and helped her into the carriage, his touch sending a jolt of electricity through her. "Are you ready for battle, Miss Vance?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "I believe I am armed for it, Your Grace," she replied, gesturing to her gown of midnight blue velvet. "Alistair," he corrected her gently as the carriage pulled away. "Tonight, we are not a duke and a miss. We are Alistair and Ilara." The gardens of Vauxhall were a fairyland of coloured lanterns, music, and masked figures. Yet, even behind their masks, Ilara could feel the stares. She and Alistair were the centre of the spectacle. Every eye was on them as he led her onto the dance floor for a waltz. "You have caused quite a stir," she murmured as he swept her into the dance. "It was my intention," he replied, his hand firm on her back, "to let the world see what I see. The titles, dowries, and the opinions of bitter people are meaningless next to character and intellect." They moved together perfectly, as if they had danced 100 times before. The rest of the world seemed to melt away, leaving only the music and the intense connection between them. In the shelter of his arms, Ilara felt safe for the first time in weeks, but their enemies were not so easily vanquished. During a break in the music, as they strolled down a lantern-lit path, Lady Beatrice and her new escort, a foppish marquis, blocked their way. "Well, well," Beatrice said, her voice dripping with scorn. "The Duke and his little pet philosopher. I am surprised you are not wearing spectacles, Miss Vance. They would complete the picture of the blue stocking he has so inexplicably taken up with." Alistair stepped in front of Ilara protectively. "Beatrice, I would advise you to choose your next words with extreme care." But Beatrice was too consumed by rage to be cautious. "Why? So you can defend your charity case? Everyone knows the truth, Beaumont. Her father was a swindler, and she is a desperate, conniving social climber. She has fooled you with her little act of being a scholar, but she is no different from any other trollop trying to sell herself to the highest bidder." "That is enough!" Alistair's voice was like the crack of a whip, but it was Ilara who stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "No, it is not enough," she said, her voice shaking but strong. She looked directly at Beatrice. "You speak of my father. My father was a brilliant man who made a mistake. He trusted the wrong people and lost everything. But he never cheated anyone. He spent the last years of his life trying to pay back every penny he owed. And you speak of me as a climber. The only thing I have ever sought, Lady Beatrice, is a conversation with someone who does not believe a woman's head should be filled with nothing but thoughts of ribbons and marriage settlements. I pity you. You have everything: wealth, beauty, status, and yet your heart is so small and empty that you can only find pleasure in the misery of others. Beatrice was speechless, her face contorted with fury. As for selling myself, Ilara continued, turning to Alistair, her heart in her throat, I have a secret you should know, Your Grace. Her voice dropped, becoming vulnerable. My family is in dire straits. Before all this, my mother was pressing me to accept an offer from Viscount Crowley. He offered to settle my family's debts in exchange for my hand in marriage. She saw a flicker of pain in Alistair's eyes. This was her gamble. She had to lay the whole truth before him. I have not given him my answer, she finished softly. But the offer stands. So you see, Lady Beatrice may be right. Perhaps I am just a woman looking for a saviour. The silence was deafening. Beatrice looked triumphant, certain that this confession of financial desperation would finally open the Duke's eyes. Alistair looked down at Ilara, his expression unreadable behind his mask. He gently reached up and untied it, letting it fall away. He then reached for hers and did the same, so they stood unmasked before their enemies. Thank you for your honesty, Ilara, he said, his voice thick with emotion. He ignored Beatrice completely, his entire world narrowing to Ilara. It is true, then. You are a woman in need of a saviour. He paused and her heart plummeted. But I have no interest in being your saviour. I have no desire to rescue a damsel in distress. He took a step closer, cupping her face in his hands. I am looking for a partner, a collaborator, a queen for my kingdom, not a decoration. The fact that you are burdened by debt is an unfortunate circumstance, but it does not define you. Your mind, your courage, your integrity, that is who you are. And that is the woman He stopped, his throat working. The woman I find myself unable to live without. He leaned in and kissed her. It was a soft, tender kiss at first, a question, and when she responded, her hands coming up to rest on his chest, it deepened, becoming a passionate declaration in front of the entire masquerade. It was a kiss that sealed their fate, a gamble of the heart that had paid off in the most spectacular fashion, leaving Beatrice Cresswell and her poisoned world to choke on their own irrelevance. The Duke's public kiss at the Vauxhall masquerade did not silence the gossip. It amplified it to a deafening roar. But its nature changed. The whispers were no longer just of scandal, but of a great, defiant romance. Ilara Vance was no longer just a target of scorn. She was a figure of fascination. Alistair did not retreat. In the days that followed, he courted her openly and with a single-minded purpose that left the ton breathless. He did not send flowers. He sent rare books. He did not take her for carriage rides in the park. He took her to the Royal Observatory at Greenwich and to private lectures on geology. He treated her not as a delicate object of affection, but as a cherished intellectual companion. He also, with quiet efficiency, dealt with her family's financial troubles. It was not a grand gesture, but a practical one. He approached Ilara with a business proposition, asking her to use her formidable organizational and mathematical skills to help manage the accounts of one of his charitable foundations. The salary he offered was more than enough to secure her family's comfort and independence. He was not rescuing her. He was empowering her. It was the most romantic gesture she could have ever imagined. The final confrontation came, as it was always destined to, at the most exclusive event of the season, the annual Blackwood Ducal Ball, hosted at Beaumont House. It was an event of staggering prestige, and an invitation was the ultimate social validation. When Elara Vance's name appeared on the guest list, it was a clear signal to everyone. She was the Duke's intended. Elara arrived on Alistair's arm, wearing a gown of deep sapphire that shimmered like a starry night. The diamonds at her throat were a gift from him, and they felt less like a decoration and more like armor. Every eye in the magnificent ballroom was upon them. The air was thick with tension. The Dowager Duchess stood at the head of the receiving line, her face a mask of glacial composure. Beside her, looking pale and defeated, was Lady Beatrice. This was their last stand. As Alistair and Elara approached, the Dowager Duchess addressed her son, but her venomous gaze was fixed on Elara. "Alistair, you have brought this person into our home. You have made a mockery of our name and our duty. Look at her. She has no lineage, no breeding. She is not fit for nobility." The music faltered. The guests held their breath, waiting for the explosion. Alistair looked from his mother to the assembled crowd of lords and ladies, the arbiters of their world. He then looked down at Elara, his expression softening into one of profound love and admiration. He raised her hand to his lips, a gesture of deep respect. He then turned his gaze back to his mother, his voice ringing with a power and clarity that commanded the entire room. "You say she is not fit for nobility," he began, his voice echoing in the sudden silence. "You, and many in this room, measure a person's worth by the purity of their bloodline and the size of their estate. You seek wives who are beautiful ornaments, and sons who are strategic alliances. You have spent your lives in a gilded cage, talking about everything and saying nothing." He gestured to Elara. "This woman, in a single conversation, showed me more of the universe than I had discovered in a decade of study. Her mind is a marvel of intellect and curiosity. Her heart is a fortress of courage and integrity. She has faced down the scorn of every one of you and has not buckled." He paused, his gaze sweeping across the stunned faces of his guests. "You are wrong, Mother. She is not merely fit for nobility." He turned to Elara, his eyes locking with hers, and the entire world seemed to fall away. "She stands beside me not as a subordinate to be elevated, but as the only woman I have ever met who is my true and absolute partner. They said she wasn't fit for nobility, until I called her what she is." He turned back to the crowd, his voice resonating with unshakable conviction. "My only equal." The silence that followed was broken by Alistair, dropping to one knee before Elara, holding her hand in both of his. In front of his mother, his rival, and the whole of London society, the Duke of Blackwood proposed. "Elara Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "you have honored me with your mind and your heart. Will you do me the ultimate honor of becoming my wife, my partner, my duchess?" Tears streamed freely down Elara's face, but her voice was steady as she replied, "Yes, Alistair. Always. Yes." A tentative, then thunderous applause erupted through the ballroom. The war was over. Love, intellect, and courage had won. The Dowager Duchess stood frozen, a statue of obsolete values, while Lady Beatrice fled the room in a final, humiliating defeat. Alistair rose, slipped a magnificent ring onto Elara's finger, and kissed his future duchess, sealing their victory and beginning their reign as the new, formidable power couple of the English nobility. 2 years passed, seasons turning the lush grounds of Blackwood Manor from the green of summer to the gold of autumn and back again. The marriage of the Duke and Duchess of Blackwood had settled from a scandalous headline into an accepted, if still remarkable, reality. Elara had not just adapted to her role, she had redefined it. She was a duchess, yes, but she was also a scholar, her partnership with Alistair bearing fruit in ways that extended far beyond the walls of their home. Their new, powerful telescope, a product of his engineering and her mathematical refinements, had become their window to the cosmos. It was during a long series of late-night observations, charting the slow, deliberate path of Uranus, that Elara noticed the anomaly. There were minute, almost imperceptible perturbations in its orbit, deviations that Kepler's laws could not fully account for. For months, she documented them, filled pages with calculations, and cross-referenced her findings with the most recent charts from the continent. One evening, as Alistair entered the observatory with 2 cups of steaming tea, he found her staring at a final, sprawling equation, her face pale with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "It's not an error in the charts," she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. "And it's not a flaw in our lens. There is another gravitational force acting upon it. There has to be another planet, a massive one, far beyond Uranus." Alistair set the cups down, his own mind instantly grasping the monumental scale of her discovery. He reviewed her calculations, his initial skepticism melting into profound excitement. Her logic was flawless, her data meticulous. "Elara, this is revolutionary," he breathed, his eyes shining with pride. "This is a discovery that will change our understanding of the solar system. You must prepare a paper. It must be presented to the Royal Society." A shadow passed over Elara's joy. "They will not accept it from me, Alistair. They will listen to you, a duke and a known man of science. But from a woman, they will dismiss it as a fancy, the hobby of a bored duchess. Then we will make them listen," he said, his jaw set with the same determination he'd shown in the face of his mother's fury. "This is your work, your discovery. It will bear your name, and your name alone." Their first attempt was met with a wall of polite but unyielding condescension. Alistair presented the request to the head of the society, Lord Abernathy, a man whose mind was as starched as his collar. "A paper from the Duchess?" Abernathy had said, a patronizing smile on his face. "How delightful. Of course, my dear Duke, if you wish to present her findings under your own name, we would be honored to consider it. We are all for encouraging the scientific pursuits of the fairer sex as a pastime." "Lord Abernathy," Alistair replied, his voice dangerously cold, "this is not a pastime. It is a significant astronomical discovery, and it belongs to my wife. She will present it." "Impossible," Abernathy stated flatly. "It is against all precedent. The Royal Society is a fellowship of men. To allow a woman to present a paper would undermine the very seriousness of our institution." The battle lines were drawn once more. It was not about society gossip this time, but about something far more entrenched, the systemic dismissal of female intellect. The whispers started again, this time in the hallowed halls of academia. They said the Duchess was overreaching, that she was using her husband's name to push her way into a man's world where she did not belong. Undeterred, Alistair devised a new strategy. He used his influence not to force the society's hand, but to create an undeniable wave of support. He invited a dozen of the most forward-thinking and respected fellows of the society to a private dinner and demonstration at Beaumont House. On the appointed evening, Elara stood before them in the great library, a large celestial chart she had painstakingly drawn herself, set up on an easel. She was terrified, her heart hammering, but as she looked at Alistair, who gave her a nod of absolute confidence, her fear subsided, replaced by the fire of her convictions. She did not begin with apologies or gentle preambles. She began with the data. For an hour, she spoke of orbital mechanics, gravitational influence, and mathematical predictions. She guided them through her months of observation, her voice growing stronger and more passionate with every equation she explained. She was not a duchess making a request. She was a scientist presenting irrefutable proof. When she finished, there was a stunned silence. Then, an old, respected astronomer named Dr. Miles, a man known for his rigorous skepticism, rose to his feet. "My dear Duchess," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "For 10 years, my colleagues and I have noted these same discrepancies. We dismissed them as atmospheric interference or instrumental error. But you had the brilliance to see what was truly there." He turned to the other fellows. "This is not a matter of precedent or gender. This is a matter of science, and the science is undeniable." One by one, the others voiced their agreement. Lord Abernathy, who was also in attendance, sat in stony, defeated silence. A month later, a special session of the Royal Society was called, and for the first time in its history, a woman stood at the podium. Duchess Elara Beaumont presented her paper, "On the Perturbations of Uranus and the Case for a Trans-Uranian Planet." Weeks after that, a package arrived at their home. It was the latest volume of the Society's journal. Alistair handed it to her, his smile gentle. Elara opened it to the first article, and there, in crisp, black print, was the title of her paper, and beneath it, her name. Not just the Duchess of Blackwood, but Elara Vance Beaumont. Tears welled in her eyes as she traced the letters. The ballroom, the whispers, the insults. They had all been a battle for her heart. This, she realized, was the battle for her mind, and for the minds of all the women who would come after her. "They called you my only equal," she whispered, looking up at her husband. "And today," Alistair said, his voice thick with pride, as he took her hand, "you have proven it to the world." Elara Vance, once the scorned wallflower, became the Duchess of Blackwood, but her greatest title was the one Alistair gave her in his heart, his equal. Their story proves that true nobility isn't found in a name, but in the strength of one's character and the courage to love against all odds. They reshaped their corner of the world, proving that a partnership built on respect and intellect is the most powerful union of all. What did you think of Elara's journey and Alistair's defiant stand for love? Do you believe a connection of the mind is the strongest foundation for a relationship? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of love conquering prejudice, please show your support by giving this video a thumbs up, sharing it with a friend who loves a powerful historical romance, and most importantly, subscribing to the channel for more stories that will capture your heart. Your support makes these stories possible. Thank you for listening.